I'm Robin DiAngelo, and this presentation is based on one that I gave at a Black Lives Matter event at Mount Zion Church in Seattle, Washington on January 15, 2015. I want to speak to the average, well-intended white progressives in the room, those like me. I will connect us to police violence by showing that police and other forms of institutional violence against black people are possible because of the role white progressives play in the racial construct. The repeated assertion that Black Lives Matter can only make sense in a context in which they do not matter to the dominant society. Including whites in the assertion isn't necessary, and thus isn't a recognizable concept. To include whites only functions to deny the saliency of race in a wholly racialized society, and to obscure power. So how do white progressives come to see Black lives as not mattering in a society that proclaims race meaningless and insists that racism can only be committed by bad people? We do so systematically through myriad social and institutional processes, but tonight I will focus on schools and neighborhoods. This image is from the College Champion Jeopardy playoffs. These are our best and brightest, certified by our universities as highly educated. This is the board at the end of their round, and as we can see, one category went untouched. Virtually all white people are taught by white people, who have been taught by white people, who've been taught by white people, who've been taught by white people, using textbooks written by white people about white people. And that is only one thread in the web of white supremacy. And so we have the resulting dominant claims of the white colorblind post-racial collective. I see people as individuals. I don't care if you're yellow, green, purple, or polka dotted. I was taught to treat everyone the same. Racism's in the past. Race doesn't have any meaning to me. Everyone struggles, but if you work hard, so-and-so just happened to be black. Or if we are sophisticated Northwest liberals, we may make these claims. I work in a very diverse environment. I have people of color in my family. I live in the most diverse zip code in the US, which apparently is 98118. I used to live in New York, and I can't believe how white it is here. My children are so much more open. Let me tell you something my daughter said just this week. We don't like how white our neighborhood is, but we had to move here for the schools. So how do we whites pull these narratives off while explicitly living in racial segregation? For example, all of these hugely popular shows spanning several decades and depicting iconic, ideal friendship take place in New York City, one of the most racially diverse cities in the US. And the message is clear: ideal friendship does not need to include people of color. Well, we pull it off through the adaptations of racism over time, or new racism. For example, internalized superiority and investment in the racial order, but in a colorblind post-racial era, that investment must be deeply submerged and vigorously denied. Individualism, which is the claim that the answer to racism is that we should all be seen as different. And universalism, which is the claim that the answer to racism is that we should all be seen the same. And as you can tell, they don't have to make sense. They can be contradictory. They can be used interchangeably in the same discussion. They just have to get race off the table, and they're both very effective at doing that. Willful ignorance or refusal to know, and preference for segregation. And of these, I think preference for segregation is perhaps the most powerful. Racially coded narratives about good schools and neighborhoods to be desired and bad ones to be avoided are ubiquitous among whites. This boundary setting is now made more convenient through an app which warns newcomers which neighborhoods to avoid in a given city. And here are the app's founders, and the app is called Sketch Factor. Well, according to the Urban Dictionary, sketchy means someone or something that just isn't right, something unsafe, someone or something that gives off a bad feeling. And clearly, for the white collective, that would be black and brown spaces. So how we think about people is the foundation for how we treat them. Discourse that positions black people as inherently dangerous while positioning whites as inherently safe has material consequences. We whites don't know or care what's going on over there as long as the boundaries between us and them are adequately enforced. Good, bad neighborhood narratives are not neutral, accidental, or benign. They enable whites to police racial boundaries in a colorblind post-racial era. On a daily basis, whites warn one another away from non-white spaces and towards white spaces, shoring up our accumulation of resources. And rest assured, all whites know what the racial coding is in the good schools and neighborhoods discourse. These narratives maintain willful white ignorance, obscure the true direction of power, and trivialize white on black violence, including enslavement, lynching, torture, medical experimentation, imprisonment, and execution. They dehumanize people of color and allow whites to rely on white supremacist depictions and projections. This image from the Academy Award-winning film is representative of the millions of messages of white superiority circulating around us daily. These narratives reinscribe ideologies of the white savior, white racial purity, abundance, benevolence, luck, and innocence. Living in segregation, whites are left to rely upon these deeply problematic but self-serving racial fantasies. The visibility of state violence is making it harder to reconcile the white conscience, as images of Emmett Till did in the 1950s. White supremacist projections and actions are much easier when they aren't unveiled for us. Names and faces have humanized our victims. Yet consider good schools from another perspective. A white teaching force that has little, if any, empathy towards black children and has been socialized to see them as inferior and even to fear them. And that same teaching force has also been socialized to deny that that is how they feel, see, respond, and treat black children. This turns the narrative on its head to expose how unsafe white schools and neighborhoods are to children of color. Also consider the psychic violence, the profound message that there is no real loss for whites in the absence of people of color from our lives. In fact, the absence of people of color is how whites measure the value of their spaces. Whites can be born into, grow, worship, learn, play, love, work, and die in racial segregation without anyone who loved, taught, or guided us conveying that we had lost anything of value by not having cross-racial relationships. Racial segregation profoundly shapes white consciousness. What we see, what we know, what we value, what we are invested in protecting. Yet how can we perceive a neighborhood or school as good if it's segregated? This discourse reproduces racist images and sanctions violence against people of color. It perverts the actual direction of danger and the ideological rationalizations for it. White supremacy is thus reinforced and obscured. Thank you.